think a lot of us up here are writers who have either written about time travel or like time travel. My name's John Hudgens. I'm a filmmaker. Some people may know me for my work on Babylon 5, various Star Wars projects, or various documentaries. I just finished work on the audiobook for the Dark Shadows Daybook and Unbound, which came out this week. But let's go down the panel. I'll let everybody introduce themselves. So.
Hi, my name's Jason Cordova. I've written about 20 books now, I think. I don't know. Mostly I write military science fiction. I've done a bit of alternate history, horror, and fantasy, though. And I've got a book with Larry Correa coming out next month.
Woo! I'm Gini, Koch. I write the Alien Kathleen Kitty Cat series for Daw Books. I also write under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths of genres, and some of that includes time travel, and I'm also very interested in it both fictionally and the reality.
My name's Kathleen O'Shea David.
Hi.
Hey!
You're just in time.
Forgot how long it takes to get from place to place.
Welcome to DragonCon.
Yeah, you have been re-educated.
I usually do an hour's walk a day. More here.
I was an editor at Del Rey Books working on Star Wars and other time-traveling fun stuff. I'm known here mostly as a master puppeteer. I did stuff in the Puppet Slam and all this stuff. And I'm an equity stage manager, so I got a lot of different things to do.
My name is Laura Hayden. I've written 14 books, novels, and a dozen short stories. I have 3 novels that were time travel. We did come in more from the romance side of the area, but the books two that I'm most known for, we call slasher, because it's romance slash science fiction slash mystery slash whatever. So no blood and gore involved. I am also laureate author for any of the authors. Come talk to me later.
Hi, I'm S.M. Stirling. Steve Stirling, actually, but they asked me what to put on my books, and I said, oh, do it the way I signed the contract. I've been writing novels since 1984, and full-time since '88, and I've written a lot of time travel stuff because I was, in my first incarnation, a historian. And I wanted to be a history professor for a while, and then I looked into that and decided to go into something more practical and down to earth. Island of the Sea of Time. I've got another time travel novel coming out called To Turn the Tide from Baen in August of 24, early August of 24. You'll be able to buy it before you come to the DragonCon next year. And I just love history.
Well, I mean, time travel sort of seems to be like one of the cliches. I mean, especially in television and stuff like that. It's like everybody's going to do the time travel episode. But when was the first time you ever were aware of time travel? You know, what was your first exposure to a time travel story, either television or book or anything like that? Let's start with you, Jason.
Oh boy. I'm a late comer to the field. I would say it was the Deep Space Nine episode where Captain Sisko went back and met James T. Kirk. And for the Trouble with Tribbles episode, and they overlaid that on a different episode of DS9. That was my first concept of, hey, time travel, that seems pretty cool.
I'm going to date myself so hard right now. The time tunnel.
Oh, yes! I love the time tunnel.
I actually, my husband and I, we bought it to rewatch it because I just remember the show as being so awesome. My husband loved it, and I just want to go back to my childhood memories. It was not what I remember. But that was, the screaming for the sheep seats was really a 1960s technique for television. But that just instilled in me very, very young that was possible. And it never seemed impossible from that point on.
Mine was, I think I was about 4 or 5. My father sitting on his knee and having him read me H.G. Wells' The Time Machine.
I think H.G. Wells probably has a meaning for all of us. When it comes to literature, the first time travel I remember reading was Replay by Ken Greenwald.
Yes.
That's good. That was a good place to start.
Second on the H.G. Wells. Also, I read Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee at King Arthur's Court at a impressionable age, And I still remember that bit where he teaches the Knights of Camelot to play baseball because they're now useless since he's introduced Gatling guns. And they have to write special rules for fastballs which bounce off armor.
Well, you mentioned that about the Gatling gun. It reminded me of Harry Turtledov's Guns of the South, because that's time travel and alternate history, and just one hell of a book, which I'm still shocked to this day nobody's made a film of it yet. What is it, Steve, let's start with you. Why do you think people like time travel stories so much?
Everyone thinks about revisiting their past and doing something differently, which is the source of both time travel and alternate history as literary genres.
I would say it's the ultimate fish out of water story. And we all want to find that commonality with that person who's thrown into a new situation and has no idea what's going on. And that's a real binding factor between the reader and the character.
I like a lot of the what if, like, if Einstein met Copernicus and that kind of stuff, where you can take two people, one who has much more knowledge of the subject going to the person who did work that actually created the subject, and having them interact with one of them trying desperately, but they never do, not to let anything go.
Well, I agree with everything everybody else said, but also I think it's fun. I'm going to be the not thoughtful person on the panel. So yeah, I just think it's fun. I think it's a fun, cool concept to do, and you can do it in so many different ways. But honestly, I think what everybody else said is also probably more right on, even if.
I like the idea of being in the now and someone from the future coming back to us and saying, hey, everything's going to crap. Stop. And how we react. And I do like the what if, like you said as well. And it's that whole wonder, that fantasy element that opens up the door to science fiction as well. And I like to mash everything like that together. And I'm dropping that personal very much, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I'm really glad you brought up Replay, because that's one of my favorite novels ever. And it's one of those ones where I don't even have my original copy of it because I've bought and given away so many copies of that. What's your favorite? Anybody have any specific favorite time travel stories? The ones that you just have to recommend to people, or ones that really inspired you? Go ahead.
I'm gonna kiss a little butt here. Actually, the Nantucket books that Steve down there wrote were my first introduction to time travel.
Outside of
DSI, I mean literature, in the reading aspect, and then Eric Flint right after that with his 1632 series.
Great minds think alike.
Mine actually is one by David Gerald called "The Man Who Folded Himself," which you have to wonder what that flow chart looked like when he was planning it out, because it wraps so perfectly on itself. And that's a trick. My husband wrote a book, I can't remember which one it was, but it had to do with time travel. Do you know which one it was?
Was it an original or
Next Generation,
Oh.
Picard.
One of the Q books, was it?
It was one of the Q books.
Q, no.
No, it wasn't Q. Anyway,
Is
whatever.
the one where Jada was an android as
I'm
a
sorry?
flesh person in one of the timelines? Because I think I have Q squared.
Q squared. There you
I have
go.
that still on my shelf.
If you don't know, my husband's Peter David. But yeah, Q.
That is good.
But Q squared is. I have actually seen. He had it's a poster. We still have it in our basement, where he made sure he didn't go off. Because it's like circles within circles where they're like the crossovers and all the rest to make
Venn
sure.
diagram.
Yeah, it's a Venn diagram that looks like insanity. But because he had that, he was able to work the book so the book as a whole does exactly what it's supposed to do.
I have one from literature. I don't even know if this really counts, but Philip Jose Farmer's River World series
That counts.
is just amazing, and I really, really recommend that to anyone who hasn't read it. But also, Time Cop starring John Claude Van Damme, is I'm gonna go there. To my mind, it's possibly the best time travel because it actually takes into account a lot of the things, you know, and the don't touch and the thing and everything else. And I just thought it was really well done. Plus, he does the splits a couple of times in his life. I mean, that's one of my favorite movies of all time because of that. But I really think they did a really good job with the time travel. A lot of times I feel like the time travel in movies is done very, very sloppily because, you know, you're like, but that makes no sense. But time travel really did its homework.
A lot of times, time travel is used as a MacGuffin.
Yeah.
Yes.
To clean something up that the writer didn't think about, as opposed to, you know, working out what would happen.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Harry's. He's a friend of mine, so yeah, Guns of the South is a good one. I like a lot of Poul Anderson's time travel stories.
Yeah.
His time patrol stories, where there's a police force that protects the course of history. He did a short story, The Man Who Came Early, about someone who gets transported back in time to 10th century Iceland. He's an American soldier who's stationed there, and bam, he's back then. That has the added virtue that modern Icelandic is actually mutually comprehensible with what they spoke there 1,000 years ago. It's a very conservative language, which brings up the fact that a lot of time travel is either limited to places where they speak English or some other modern language, or there's some impossible intervention that lets you talk to the people back then. Because read a good phonetic reading of Geoffrey Chaucer, and you'll see what English sounded like 700 years ago. And I like Sprague de Camp's Lest Darkness Fall, in which an American archaeologist is basically struck by lightning in Rome in 1938 and gets sent back to the 6th century. And you know, that was a milestone in time travel stories because he thought of all the requisite things. Like, the guy can speak Latin, but the Latin he speaks is not really very much like what they spoke in Rome in the 500s. And he knows a lot of the history, but our written records from that period are sort of patchy, and they were written by the equivalent of gossip columnists or people with bees in their bonnets. So they're not necessarily accurate either. And he has a lot of problems trying to introduce stuff. The first thing he does that really takes off is distilling and producing what he calls super wine.
One Lavacrio with a short suta. The only Chaucer I know. I always recommend To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis. Not because she lives in Colorado where I live, but because I laughed all the way through that book.
You mentioned this about the MacGuffin. I mean, that was one of the things that, like, in the Avengers Endgame, they sort of played on, you know, these are known things, the rules of time travel. And it seems like everybody has their own take on what the rules of time travel are. You know, some say this, some say this. What do you think are the inviolate rules of time travel, stuff that you have to do, Steve?
That depends,
or not do?
That depends on the universe you make up when you're writing about it. Time can be invariant. Poole did some stories where you can't change time, something always prevents you. Time can be easily changeable, Time Patrol series. You know, it all depends on the parameters you set. The only thing I would object to is sudden arbitrary changes in the parameters in the middle of a book without a very good reason.
Consequences and consistency. That's pretty much what you have in logic. Those are things you have to make it work.
You have to travel through time.
I have nothing to add. No. I think you have to make sure, and that's an echo of what basically what we said, though, is that you are not, the author's convenience or screenwriter's convenience is really, that's what did it for me on the rewatch of the Time Tunnel. Because they could do anything they wanted but bring them back. They sent people and they brought other people back. They disrupted the timeline everywhere they went while pretending they were taking care of the timeline. And it was just, there was no consistency. In one episode, You know, they can bring somebody, a Civil War soldier back, going, right? And in another, they can send you a brick. Why? What? There's no logic whatsoever. And somehow Doug and Tony, our heroes, know that brick couldn't have been here. It's just, right? Yes, literally. There was no logic. And so I agree. It basically is your logic should not be arbitrary, and it absolutely should make sense for your universe. And if it's just like, oh, today we can do this, it's just flapping in the wind.
Yeah, rules of the universe you created are very, very, very important, but also don't forget the rule of cool. I mean, if it works for your story and it seems really cool, I mean, you can bend your rules a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kath, you mentioned you have to travel in time. I want to throw this to Steve again. Is Conquistador a time travel novel, or is it an alternate reality? Because I can't remember if it's...
It's essentially an alternate history novel, and it's an alternate history novel in ways which people usually don't suspect, because the universe they start out with is very similar to ours, but it's actually an alternate universe. And the hint there is that the guy named John Rolfe, because the male line of the Rolfes who married Pocahontas died out in Virginia. Although most of the first families of Virginia eventually ended up being descended from Pocahontas through her children with Rolfe. But in that universe, it persisted. And John Rolfe is the person who finds out the way to travel between alternate histories in 1946, which is the plot driver for the whole thing.
It had been a while since I read that, and I was just trying to remember because I loved that book. Let me just fanboy over that, you know. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I object to in alternate history, but time travel and time travel producing alternate histories, is that people forget that human beings have about 3 pounds of bacteria and viri in their bodies. And being exposed to the wrong bacteria can have really drastic effects. In Island in the Sea of Time, the island of Nantucket is set back to 1250 BC. And, you know, they're going crazy because they don't know what caused it. And so they send a small boat, a pontoon float plane, to the mainland to see what's going on. And there's nothing, just big trees all over the place. And then they land in Boston Harbor, and they meet some of the locals under rather unfortunate circumstances. And one of them has the flu and sneezes on somebody. And drastic things happen because of that. Virgin field epidemic, look up the concept.
That actually led into one of my next questions is, what do you hate about science fiction? Oh, well, we could spend a day on that.
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
No. What chaps your ass about time travel stories? I mean, what is it that just really drives you nuts that when you see stories?
I'm going to piss a lot of people off about this, I'm sorry. But time travel is one way. There is no coming back from time travel. Because you just being in any time frame where you go, even if you just moved a fly out of the way, you've changed the path of history. You created a new splinter universe. There is no coming back. You could fast forward 800 years in the future. That's a different future than what you left just because of that one item that got moved. There is no coming back to your future. Time travel is possible, that's fine. But you're not changing anything about your past. You're creating a new future. And that one that you are not originally involved in.
But isn't that again playing with the rules that you set up for that story? Because, I mean,
Well, that's where the rules of cool come in, and you're going to bend it.
Okay.
I don't mind the going back and forth, though in my novella, The Disciple, they're trying to stop vampires and the vampire plague. They know when it started. They're inoculated for everything, all these other things. But coming back, the teams that come back just after a year, just their minds are gone. They can't handle the return transition. So I'm kind of lean with Jason on that. In that, I think it's more compelling if your traveler can never get home. I mean, that was the compelling thing on the time tunnel, where they can't get home. And I think that's a very compelling thing because you're now forced to live in another world, and not necessarily a world you wanted to go to, not a world that you're comfortable in, for whatever reason, whether you went willingly or unwillingly, you're now stuck. And I think that makes it for more compelling and if you do it right, empathetic character, because they will always be a stranger in a strange land.
For me, it's the argument of how time travel works within the book. You know, it's like we've had this discussion a bazillion times. Somebody said the Avengers, which I think is one of the best versions of it in terms of why it should be this way, and the other half going, it's not that way. And, you know, who's going to really know? Because once they do this, they may have changed stuff and they don't know it. Or you go from the, you know, the other point of view. But it stops a book cold for me when you start arguing about time travel and the effects thereof. It's like, I assume I already know, unless you're doing something cute, of what time travel is and what the consequences are, because I've read all this other stuff.
What bothers me is sloppy mechanism. Is someone, oh, we went back in time. Well, how? You stepped into the quantum leap accelerator, vanished. Okay, that was a legitimate way. Or you flew around the Earth backwards really, really fast, you know? Okay, at least there was an explanation, and because of great emotion, it doesn't happen all the time. But without a consistent mechanism that causes time travel, because can it be accidental? Mm-hmm. The mechanism could be accidental, but I mean, you just can't, oh, I think I'll go back in time, poof, vanish, you know? That's what you're Doctor Who. Well, he's got a TARDIS, it's okay.
Well, I mean,
That's a mechanism. It's a good mechanism.
Jack Finney's time and again, don't they just sort of like wish themselves, dream themselves back into the past?
Yeah, they align themselves so much mentally with the past
Right.
that suddenly they're there. You know,
But that's the rules of his universe.
credibility is not the same thing as like reality. You've got to have a credible reason why people are displaced in time. You should know yourself what caused it when you're writing the story, although the characters may never know.
Exactly.
And I did a sequel to the Spragg de Camp story. I can't have forgotten the title. Lest Darkness Fall. I did a sequel for a theme anthology that was honoring de Camp. And time travelers come back from the future that Martin Padway created. And it's called The Apotheosis of Martin Padway. And they beam him up through the roof of a building where he was trapped by agents of Justinian who doesn't like him. And he wakes up and he looks around at them and he notices that, well, they're all young. And they all look like in glowing health. And boy, those holographic screens are wild. And so they start asking him, you know, how he made all these inventions. And he says, you don't know I was a time traveler? You know, which I thought was amusing. Plot-wise, multiple travel through time really makes things difficult. It really, really, really makes things difficult. I did some tie-in novels for the Terminator series once. And there's multiple travel through time, and I was doing a fan dance on a razor blade to keep that stuff credible. So in my own books, I usually do time travel as a one-off thing. Actually, I've got another one coming out in August of next year, To Turn the Tide, and one of the characters who gets thrown back in time thinks it's a good thing this only happened once. If it happened all the time, I'd go bug fuck. You know, which is credible, I think.
Yeah. Now, I don't know how many of you guys do time travel, like to historical periods or in the future back to a past, which is our future. But how do you guys approach research for this? Because when I brought up Jack Finney, that's one of the things that I think really helped sell that book is all the photographs he put in there and all the research he did into that time period. What kind of research do you do, anybody, for your books? I mean, what do you look to inspire?
Lots.
Yeah.
I married a historian.
There you go. No, for me, it's to take a look back at where I am putting people. I did a Doctor Who story for Big Finish called On a Pedestal that was about the Doctor, Jamie, and Victoria going back and meeting William Wallace before he was Braveheart. he's just a cattle rustler. You know, and they learn to do that and all the rest. But the amount of reading I did about William Wallace before he was William Wallace, including like the conjectures and all the rest, so that I would know, you know, what were the rules for cattle rustling, because there were rules, and all these other things that were of the time, so that when I put the doctor and his companions in there, that they were going into that period of time.
I mean, I think you have to, if you're going backwards, you absolutely need to research the era, the mores, the dress, you know, I think Diana Gabaldon did that really well with Outlander, where, you know, when she arrives, everybody thinks she's been raped by the English because she's just in her shift, and so forth. So I think if you're going backwards, you really have to know the history and how you think your character is going to either try to affect or not affect the history. Are they there for a big event, or are they just there? There's different things. If you're going forward, you really need to extrapolate what you think. Are they going forward into a utopian society? Did we manage that? I'm sorry.
Drink some of the water, drink some of the water.
Yeah, or did we, are they in a deserted wasteland, right? And so you need to extrapolate, you know, and how far in the future? Are they going into next week? That's easier in some ways, but harder in others. So it's very easy to say, oh, they jumped 1,000 years and you can make it almost anything. They jumped 10 years. Now you have to be very, very accurate, because we all know what's coming in there. Like in Alien, the movie Alien, the computer in the ship is gigantic. And by the time Aliens 2 comes out, Aliens, James Cameron now has to turn that into something that we can believe, because computers got smaller, not bigger, in the time between those two movies. So, and they're in the future, so why is this? So I think Cameron did a fabulous job of adapting something that had guessed incorrectly and bringing it into something that we could all go, oh, yeah, okay, I can see that. So you really got to research it for back, and you've really got to extrapolate very well to go forward. Or you become dated, and no one buys it anymore.
Brain fart. The method of how you're doing the time travel is important. Are you going to go with hand waving, or are you going to have hard science? One of the things I am is a huge numbers nerd, and if I ever do time travel where it's direct energy point time travel from the scientific side of it, if I'm going back 800 years, I have to figure out the position of the sun, where it is in the universe, where the Earth is in relation to the sun, where it is in relation to the universe. Stargate did a very good job of explaining space travel with their four-dimensional model that they did when they were explaining how the Stargate works. Time travel is actually a little bit like that, where you've got to figure out all 6 dimensions. You okay, Steve?
Did somebody bring Steve some water?
No, it's asthma.
I swear I have no perfume on.
But yeah, so you're good?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
I've been doing this off and on since I was a little kid.
Yeah, well, were you finished? Okay. Well, what I was saying about what you were talking about, there's actually a really great point in Greg Binford's Timescape, where they're sending a message back to like 1962, because you can point to 1962 in the sky. You know that the entire solar system travels through space, and so we know they figured out with the tachyons, but there's a point in the sky where 30 years ago the entire solar system was, and so they tried to beam stuff to that to try to get a message back in time. But that's exactly what it was a really great, hard science way of.
Yeah. Or you can just assume that gravity works during time travel.
Which is something that always confused me, especially in television. They go back into the past and they happen to be right at it's just a time machine. It's not a time and space machine.
Right.
So it's a time machine, and it even happened in the time machine. The Earth continues to rotate. So you're not, if you launch off from London and you go 200 years into the future, you're not necessarily going to land in the same place, because between the planet, you might actually end up in space.
Yeah, unless you assume that gravity continues to operate during time
And the
travel.
Earth's natural wobble anyway.
There's time after time where they launch in London with H.G. Wells' machine and ends up in San Francisco. And I always thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, because the machine was taken to San Francisco in the intervening time. Time After Time actually is quite a good movie,
Yeah.
and one of the things it gets across is how even if you're speaking the same language, they're not the same people if you're going back even a generation, much less a couple. There's an old saying. The past is another country, and they do things differently there. And even your grandparents, when they were young people, were like aliens in many respects.
I think one of my favorite lines out of Time After Time is when Jack the Ripper is taken and Wells is like, he's gone to Utopia. And the whole audience is laughing because it's like, oh, my sweet summer child. So yeah, that was a great movie.
I thought you were going to go the other one where he was like, in my time I was a freak, and here I'm an amateur, or whatever.
Or when Wells says, I was an exponent of free love, and the woman he's talking to starts laughing, and she says, oh, I think I remember my granny talking about that.
You mentioned Time After Time. Have you ever read the other Time After Time, Alan Apple's book?
Yeah.
Because he did like 3 of those, and because I remember that was another one of the ones where the research on those was incredible, because he said it like the Centennial Exposition and Mark Twain and stuff. If y'all never read this, there's a guy named Alan Apple, Appel. He wrote a book called Time After Time. It has nothing to do with the film in any way. It's just a similar title. I highly recommend that.
Yeah. And research can trip you up. When I was writing Island in the Sea of Time, I did a lot of research on the Bronze Age in Europe, and I thought, well, this is far enough back that there's no written records, so they can't really tell anything about details, so I'm safe. Oh, was I wrong? Because just over the last decade or so, they've been able to source ancient DNA from human remains. And if you get one person's DNA, you're getting all their ancestors' DNA. So you don't really need enormous samples to really tell things. And there's a migration going on in Britain in 1250 BC, an island in the Sea of Time, and it actually turns out to have happened a little over 1,000 years earlier, in 2500 BC rather than 1250 BC. And if I was rewriting the book, I'd have to put it back 1,000 years and make one of the protagonists a brunette rather than a blonde.
Anybody out there have any questions? Y'all have anything y'all want to ask us? Yeah, right.
Just throw one thing out. You talked to David Gerald's Man of Bullet himself. There's also Robert Heinlein's All You Zombies,
True.
Yep.
which is pretty much the same story but smaller, tighter. But what do you think about the idea of going forwards in time in terms of going to sleep? The Sleeper Awakes, Buck Rogers, the other methodology for going
Well,
forward.
it's one way.
Well, that is the time travel that we all actually do, just exaggerated.
That's actually very true. I like it because of all of them. It's the most believable thing that I think we can come up with. I mean, now so everybody's looking at how you do that for long range or even short range space flight. So to me that's probably your most believable one. And even something like 28 Days Later did that. He Nicole, he wakes up and the world is completely different. It's only been 28 days. So I like that one, but it's very, to my mind, that's your most conventional way of doing it. And I cannot remember the book. There's a fabulous book that does that where the sleepers don't know that they're sleeping, that when they come out, they've been like regressed in time, and I'm gonna kick myself. I'm gonna remember this at 2 in the morning. But it's a wonderful book, and if I only could remember the title and the author, I could recommend it to you.
Well, if you think about folklore, Ben Winkle was written in 1819, Washington Irving, and that literally was the go to sleep and wake up in a whole new time area.
Yeah.
Of course, that raises the problem that predicting the future is inherently impossible, and science fiction authors took a long time to realize that.
And as soon as you,
And we're still gonna keep trying.
I always just put my science fictional near futures in an alternate timeline, so I could say, that's because the history was different.
yeah, right here.
Out of curiosity, as science fiction authors, you play around with ideas, but do any of you actually believe time travel is possible?
Yes.
Yeah, we're doing it right now.
Well,
Maybe.
a forward time travel, because that doesn't run into things about the Earth moving through space or the universe expanding.
It still does, because if you move forward in time, say 100 years, you're not going to land where you were on the planet.
Well, unless you're in suspended animation.
True.
I think it's something that, a few years ago, the idea of a multiverse was just me and comics, and now we're proving that there's a multiverse out there. I think anything, a wrinkle in time, you could do a Tesseract. I think my grandmother was a huge hard science fiction fan. And she said she wanted to see the future that she would not live to see, because her viewpoint was anything the authors could imagine could be made real. And it is. And I think they're working on warplanes because of Star Trek. So yeah, I think it's possible. I don't know that we'll see it, but I think it's very possible.
Well, like Jason said, I mean, if it's happened, we wouldn't, and somebody's made a change, we wouldn't know it. I mean, that
Right.
that might explain the Mandela effect, why people think Berenstain bears, or the
Yeah.
I mean, people. If someone has made a change, we're not going to know it, but it may have happened. Who knows?
I expect them to invent eternal youth about a week after I die.
I think in the grand scheme of science and scientists, we know diddly shit. There's so much more out there that we possibly have no idea what's going on. No matter how brilliant people are, there's things we don't know anything.
Is there a difference between diddly shit and horse squat? I mean,
Yes.
No, I think that's pretty much the same.
okay. Yeah, give it right here.
Science fiction, there's typically, the author sets certain rules for time travel. What do you think of the idea of whatever time travel mechanism? It's a variance of degrees. Like you might go back 1 year of your target date, or you might go back 10 years of your target date, and it's randomized because they can't quite get it pinpointed, and so the travelers are sent back sometimes 10 years past their target date.
If that's your setup, that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, you're asking us what do we think about it?
Yeah. If you think it's
And
like
I
a
think
cool
it sounds
idea, or-
fine. I mean, it's all the world you're going to create.
Yeah.
So whatever you want to create, as long as you make your rules.
That has interesting plot implications, and it would be a good device under certain circumstances.
Yeah, just remember the rule of cool.
Allows a targeting system.
Didn't Doomsday Book do that because she was supposed to not hit the play gear? And she hit the play gear?
Yeah.
And of course, their point out language, they thought they taught her, I forget, Latin in the 13th century English. And nobody, so she had to pretend she was a foreigner. And now that she went back on her Latin, because church Latin's a lot more conservative, they at least understand that a little better. Because what they had thought it would be pronounced like, in 14th century England was not anything close to what they had taught her.
Yeah, you over here?
You guys, to follow up on the question about whether or not you believe in time travel in the past could have, or was actually possible. Which theory of how it would affect the future do you tend to like this? Would it change the future? Would it create alternate timelines? Would everything you do already have happened?
I'm pretty stubborn about this. I think we're just creating alternate timelines. Anytime you go back in time, you're creating a whole new branch of humanity. And I like to joke around. I like the idea of the multiverse. And in the back of my twisted little writer mind, I'm like, well, the reason the multiverse exists is because guys 500 years in the future are going back in time trying to change things and fix it.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate non-falsifiable hypothesis.
Yeah, you right there in the green?
With Islands in the Sea of Time, it didn't read too much like a science fiction, but more like a sociology experiment. Are there any other like time travel books that will kind of copy that?
I hope so. Sincerest form of flattery. Yeah, you're going to, if you bring people from different times together, it's always going to have interesting consequences. A lot of that will depend on whether it's a single time traveler or a large number, whether they just die immediately or not. In the one I've just finished, the evil Austrian physicist has, among other things, piled up several large crates of antibiotics and antivirals that he intends to take back with him, and the Americans get them. Because if you ever travel and go into a different watershed, it can have unfortunate effects on your intestines. That's another thing.
Montezuma's revenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, only that was no joke in the old days. It could kill you quite easily.
Yep.
Other things. Getting used to minor stuff would be, the first thing my time travelers have to do is learn how to tie on a Roman subulaculum, which is a loincloth. Because, one pair of fruit of the loom is not going to cut it.
Yeah,
The females among them sort of blanch and say, no more Tampax, ever. The Roman idea, the Romans had, by the standards of the ancient world, very good sanitation, lots of sewers and stuff, but you still had to know what exercito means, which means coming out.
Yeah, you there with the Nintendo shirt?
Yeah. So, time travel stories at their root are just sort of they're another version of portal stories where a person goes from one setting to another setting.
Yeah.
And all what we've been discussing so far, at least as I think we sort of have this as a shared assumption, is that other setting is in some way tied to the primary universe of Earth as we know it, right? Do you have examples of good stories where there's a secondary world and there's time travel in that secondary world? That's
Q squared. Seriously.
yeah. I've read that book. It's great.
I think David Weber, his Gordian protocol, has people in the future traveling to different Earths in the past and not realizing that they were destroying every Earth that they visited on their archaeological missions. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head.
I got nothing.
David.
Yeah, you.
Well, one of the time travel mechanisms.
Louder, please.
One of the time travel mechanisms we haven't mentioned is the forward traveling consciousness, the person from the past who somehow lives way beyond expectation, and in the book we see hints of the past. And like one of your books was like that, Saber and Shadow from the Fifth Millennium series, like just hinted at near the end. And that was one of my first exposures to time travel. So, I mean, I've always found those fascinating, the comparisons, and like also the implication that there's this person from the past going forward and forward and forward and trying to do something, like their ideas of what it should be, as opposed to the people who were just coming along and evolving and without that history.
Yeah. Of course, if you've got someone from the 12th century, they're probably going to be thinking, why don't they use nuclear weapons in a crusade? So.
You have one?
Yeah, I had one. Have you ever either published or unpublished kind of massage a problem with your time travel story and your fans forgave you for it? Or the opposite, is there something that your fans will never forgive you for doing something in a time travel story?
I deny everything.
My fans don't like it when I kill their favorite characters, so that has nothing to do with time travel.
Yeah,
That's
that's
just bitter resentment there. But, yeah.
I could say as an editor, because I have edited time travel stories, always fun, is when I have to go back to the author and say, you've got to rewrite the last third of the book because you screwed up. You know, you did not, there is no logic to why it should go from this point to this point. So you either need to give me a bridge or you need to rewrite the last third.
For the bridge.
Yeah, the bridge.
That raises an interesting question. Maybe people who write perfect novels the first time are actually time travelers. Every time they get an editorial correction, they just hop back and make it before they submit it.
I like how this happens.
I will admit to one problem where I reprinted a book after 20 years, and one of the references of the numbers, instead of it being 1895 going to 1995, 110 years, it kind of screwed up, and so we had a class ring that was 10 years off for my lead character. That got through editing 3 times. And we finally caught it after we had the scathing review on Amazon.
Yeah.
Mistake.
You guys have, or y'all have alluded to this several times in your other answers, but in general, you just find like large time hops or short time hops easier to kind of conceptualize what all you need to deal with in the story? Or how does the length of the time traveling impact like how hard it is for you as a writer?
Depends on the story. Depends on what your needs are within the story. Personally, if I'd rather do a big jump, because then I don't have to deal with the past. It can be whatever I want it to be. You know, I can make up whatever I want. The short hops are actually harder because you've got to keep track of what you've done within that period.
I think the nearer to your present day you're staying, the harder it is. Because if you jump somebody back to 1985, there's a whole host of people that know when you get it wrong.
Yeah. So I assumed that was the answer until Mr. Stirling started talking about all the problems of his stories. For
Well,
people
but there's
going back
problems no matter what. You've got historical readers are they
Incredibly
look.
intelligent.
Yeah.
They look for where you're wrong, and they cannot wait to tell you and everybody else on the internet
How you got it wrong.
how you got it wrong. So if you're doing anything historically, it is just this minefield of I got to get it right.
So just always jump 10,000 years to the future.
I mean,
If you think about it, if you jump within your own lifespan, you can run into yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to explode the universe when that happens. You know, let's jump back 100
Well, I
years.
remember
I'm clear.
there was like an episode of The Big Bang Theory where what was it, Leonard Sheldon went to Dixie Trek, and I'm like, A, that Dixie Trek wasn't there. That guest wasn't there. I was at that convention.
So as soon as you're somewhere where people can tell, it's just it's a minefield. Is it worth it to do it? Sure, absolutely. If that's what works for your story, if that's where your characters need to be, absolutely. But just know that you're in. You know, if you jump a year in the future, you really have to make a very intelligent extrapolation for what that's going to be like. Because we're all going to be that. By the time your book's published, we're already past it, and so we know if you're wrong.
Well, we're getting down to the end now. I think you sir, had, you in the gray suit, you had a question. I think you'll be our last one, then we'll start wrapping things up.
A couple of stories that again point out some of the differences we've got. You've got, if you want to go really short, you've got Fred Brown's Experiment, which does a whole time travel paradox in about 300 words, very cleverly. Talking about people going forward, you've got Break the Camp Snarling Band, which has a Neanderthal going into modern times. And in terms of the future coming back, I would suggest something like the Cutner-Moore vintage season, which again throws an interesting set of collaborations there.
Anybody have anything?
No?
I've asked various questions about this, but your first experience with this. But as we wrap this up, what do you think is the best time travel story you've ever read? Oh, Jason, you're on the spot.
Oh, you're gonna. Oh, me. Oh, thanks.
Shall I start with Steve?
Yeah, start with Steve.
I think my own, never mind. I've enjoyed so many of them. Lest Darkness Fall, Guns of the South. Just a lot of classics in the time travel genre.
My recommendation of Connie Willis stands.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jules Verne.
Which one did you do that was time travel?
Well, I look at it more that Verne was ahead of his time, if you consider everything that he put within his books. Yeah, he himself is a time traveler because of all the stuff he came. But if you look at a lot of the things that he described that now exist, I mean, his ratio is much above the norm. So, in a way, it is time travel.
He put his cannon on Cape Kennedy.
Yeah, the big cannon to shoot people to the moon was...
That was
Honestly, there's not that much room in a cannon that's shooting the moon at rockets.
Launched from Tampa Town, not far from where we launched today. You bet those two things.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
For me, there's a lot of different things, and I'm not going to, bless you, I'm not going to pick one because I'm just going to go back to, for those of you who are a little more visual, Time Cop. I'm going to stand by Time Cop.
He does the splits and everything, though.
Yeah, but I liked the movie. I thought the way they handled it. I'm still going to stand by Time Cop.
And this one's on a kitchen
We're talking
counter.
books. This is sci-fi lit.
Well,
Okay.
I'm sure there was a book about it.
I'm sure there was actually a book.
Well, I'll give Jason a moment while he's still.
I've stalled as long as I could.
But I was just saying,
okay?
for me, I would have to go with either Guns of the South or Replay, because Replay, especially if you guys have never read that, it was Groundhog Day done right, and before Groundhog Day.
I'm gonna third Guns of the South. Loved that book. And on 1632 by Eric Flint. That was such a great. I mean, he did a hand waving time travel in the very beginning of the first book, and the rest of it's really alternate history. But just how he handled it and how they responded to it was so great. I love that.
And okay, fine. Philip Jose Farmer's Riverwalk.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to remind everybody that DragonCon has got the DragonCon charity with Sue. I'm sorry, I just completely blanked on the name. Cure Childhood Cancer, and she's also got some coloring books for sale for $10 each to help sponsor that. And also remember, if you liked this panel, rate it 5 stars in the app. And if you didn't like it, rate it 5 stars ironically. And if everybody could go through real quick and let us know your names again and where we can find you the rest of the weekend.
My name's Jason Cordova, and I'll be at Baen. I'll pretty much live at the Baen booth this weekend.
I'm Gini Koch. Right after this, at 2 o'clock, I'm signing in the graphic audio booth, booth 3205. I've got panels all through the weekend, but most of the time you can find me in the Spartanac booth 2125.
Well, this evening you'll find me as the head judge of the workmanship contest. After that, if you want to find me, I'll probably have a puppet on my arm. That's a real good way to find me.
I've got the Quantum Leap reboot panel at 2:30 today, and otherwise, I'm just wandering around. You always find me online at author-author.net.
Yeah, you can find my website at smstirling.com, all lowercase, and I post sample chapters of my books, sort of like a free introductory take of heroin. And I will be doing The Art of Altering History at 4 o'clock, and I will be signing at 6, and I will be doing a reading from my next book, the one that's coming out next August, tomorrow at 2:30. And I heartily recommend all of these occasions.
Like I said, my name is John Hudgens. I'll be doing a raft of panels tomorrow. The one that will probably be the most popular is be me and Claudia Christian and Tracy Scoggins over in the Regency Ballroom around, I think, 11:30 tomorrow. bunch of other panels. You can find my website is zteenproductions.com. My documentaries are streaming on Amazon.prime. And I thank you guys for coming in here and listening to us blitherhood you guys for an hour. Thanks for coming.